Picture this: a lifetime folded into the creases of a single worn-out map. Every line a road traveled, every smudge a story. I'm Renee, 70 years young, and I've spent over 40 of those years tethered to James, my husband, my anchor. We've weathered storms together, built a life in a house that's grown smaller with each passing year, its dim corners no longer holding the warmth they once did. It's not just the walls that feel tight, it's the air, heavy with the weight of routine, of days blurring into one another. James, he's the steady one, always has been. A man of few words, but when he speaks, it's with purpose. Every thought measured like he's drafting a blueprint for the future. Me, I'm the dreamer, often caught staring out the window, tracing the outlines of a life we've carved out, wondering if there's still room to sketch something new. Our home. It's been a faithful shell, but it's no longer us. The creaking floors, the faded wallpaper, they're echoes of a past we've outgrown. So we decided it was time for a change, for a place that breathes light, with windows wide enough to frame a view that might stir something dormant in us. We want space, not just in square feet, but in spirit, a canvas for these twilight years. That's when I first heard Tobias's voice over the phone. He's the realtor guiding us toward this new chapter, though I haven't met him face to face yet. His tone was calm, almost soothing, like a steady hand on your shoulder, assuring you it's okay to take the leap. I booked a tour of a show apartment in a new development with just that one call, feeling a flicker of certainty that this was the right path, even if my heart wasn't entirely sure. There's a strange cocktail of emotions swirling in me as I think about leaving our old place behind. I'm excited, yes, for the promise of something fresh, for mornings where the light spills in and doesn't stop at the edge of a cramped room. But there's sadness, too, a quiet ache for the memories we've pressed into every inch of that house, the laughter, the tears, the silent nights when words weren't needed. I can still see the scuff marks on the hallway floor from when our children were small, tearing through the house with boundless energy. Leaving feels like closing a book I'm not ready to finish, even if the last chapters have grown stale. And beneath it all, there's something else, a restlessness I can't pin down. It's not just about the house, I know that much. It's a longing, a whisper in the back of my mind asking if there's more to feel, more to chase, even at this age. I don't have the words for it yet, but it tugs at me, persistent, like a thread caught on a splinter. This morning, as we set out for the new development, James drove with his usual quiet focus, hands steady on the wheel, while I gazed out the window, watching the city unfold in flashes of steel and glass. My mind was already half in this new place, half clinging to the old, when we pulled up to the building, a sleek tower that seemed to pierce the sky, all modern angles and shimmering windows. As we stepped out of the car, a man approached us from the entrance, his smile as warm as a summer afternoon. That had to be Tobias. He looked younger than I'd imagined, maybe in his early 30s, with neatly styled dark hair and a tailored suit that fit him like it was made just for this moment. There was an effortless confidence about him, a kind of ease that made you feel like you'd known him for years. His voice, just as smooth and inviting as it had been on the phone, greeted us with a casual, "Welcome to a space of possibilities." He shook James's hand first, then mine, his grip firm but not overbearing, and I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. James gave a polite nod, his face as unreadable as ever, while I felt a spark of curiosity ignite in me. What was it about this man that made everything seem just a little brighter? Tobias led us into the building, and I was immediately struck by the lobby. Marble floors gleaming under soft lighting, modern art pieces hanging on the walls like silent promises of a different life. It was a far cry from the worn-out charm of our old home, and I felt a flutter of excitement as we followed him to the elevator. He chatted lightly about the building's design as we rode up, his tone so natural it was like we were old friends catching up. When the doors opened, we stepped into the show apartment, and I swear my breath caught for a moment. The open-plan living room and kitchen stretched out before us, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that poured natural light into every corner. The city skyline sprawled beyond the glass, a breathtaking panorama of rooftops and distant bridges, all bathed in the golden glow of late morning. The furniture was minimalist, clean lines, neutral tones, a kind of untouched luxury that made the space feel like it was waiting just for us. I could almost hear the silence, the kind that isn't heavy but inviting, like a blank page begging for a story. Tobias began his tour, guiding us through the space with a practiced ease. He pointed out what he called emotional touch points, little details that made the apartment more than just walls and windows. He described how the light hits the kitchen countertops at sunrise, turning them into a canvas of warm hues, and gestured toward a quiet corner by the window, perfect for curling up with a book on a rainy day. When he stepped out onto the balcony, inviting us to follow, he painted a picture of sipping coffee there in the early hours, watching the world below come to life. His words weren't just a sales pitch. They were an invitation, a quiet lure to imagine a life here. As we moved through the apartment, I found myself hanging on to every word, my mind spinning with possibilities. James stayed a step behind, taking it all in with his usual measured silence, while I felt something stirring inside me, a hunger for this new beginning. Tobias seemed to sense it too, his gaze lingering on me just a moment longer than necessary as he suggested we check out the master bedroom next. James nodded, saying he'd join us in a minute after taking a closer look at the balcony view, leaving me to follow Tobias down the short hallway alone. Stepping into the master bedroom felt like crossing into a different world. More of those floor-to-ceiling windows dominated the space, framing the city beyond like a living painting. The soft afternoon light streaming in and casting golden patterns across the floor. The bed sat in the center, pristine and untouched, draped in crisp white linens that looked almost too perfect to disturb. A sleek wooden bed frame anchored the room, its dark tones a striking contrast to the airy brightness everywhere else. The atmosphere was quiet, almost intimate, a stark shift from the open expanse of the living area. Tobias's tone changed as we stood there, softening into something more personal, less like a realtor and more like someone sharing a secret. He stepped closer, running a hand along the smooth edge of the bed frame, his fingers tracing the wood with a kind of reverence. "This room," he said, his voice low. "It's designed for new beginnings, a place to start over, to feel something fresh." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication, and when his gaze met mine, there was an intensity in his eyes that made my chest tighten. "This space is perfect for firsts," he added, his voice dropping even lower, almost a whisper, as if the walls themselves might overhear. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. A storm of conflicting emotions churned inside me. Confusion, a flicker of guilt for even standing here with him like this, but also an undeniable pull, a current drawing me closer despite myself. My mind raced back to James out on the balcony, oblivious to this moment, and yet I couldn't move, couldn't break the tension that crackled between us. It was as if the room itself held its breath, waiting to see what I'd do. And then, before I could fully grasp what was happening, it did. It happened so quickly, almost mechanically, right there on that untouched bed in an apartment we hadn't even bought. I betrayed James. There's no other way to say it, no softening the raw edge of that truth. It wasn't passionate or reckless in the way you might imagine. It was quiet, precise, almost detached on Tobias's part, his movements controlled, his expression unreadable even as it unfolded. But inside me it was a storm, emotions I hadn't felt in years crashing to the surface, desires I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten they existed. In the silence that followed, I heard myself for the first time in decades, my own voice echoing in my mind, clear and unapologetic, demanding to be acknowledged. I looked at the rumpled bedding, the once perfect linens now a testament to what I'd done, and the weight of it settled over me like a heavy fog, thick and inescapable. But here's the thing, I didn't feel regret, not in that moment. Instead, there was a strange clarity, a sense of reclaiming something I'd lost long ago, something I hadn't even known I was missing, until it surged back to life. I adjusted my clothes with trembling hands, smoothing my hair as if that could erase the evidence of what had just happened. Tobias stepped back, his demeanor shifting seamlessly, his professional tone returning as if nothing had transpired between us. "Shall we head back to the living area?" he asked. His voice smooth and unaffected, his face a mask I couldn't read. I nodded, barely trusting myself to speak, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. My mind was a tangle of thoughts, grappling with the reality of my actions, with what this meant for me, for I heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching down the hallway, each one a hammer strike against the fragile shell of this moment. My breath hitched as James appeared in the doorway of the master bedroom, 2 steaming cups of coffee balanced carefully in his hands. His face was neutral at first, a blank slate as he took in the room, his eyes scanning the space with that deliberate, measured way of his. They moved from me standing stiff as a board near the foot of the bed, to Tobias, who lingered a few steps away, his posture casual but alert. Then James's gaze dropped to the rumpled bedding, the once pristine linens now a silent confession of what had just unfolded here. My stomach twisted into knots, a cold sweat prickling at the back of my neck. I braced myself for the storm I was sure would come, anger, betrayal, the kind of hurt that cuts deeper than words. I stood rigid, my hands clenched at my sides, waiting for the explosion that would shatter everything. Tobias, on the other hand, seemed unfazed, stepping back just slightly, as if to give us space, though his presence still filled the room like a shadow you can't quite shake. But the storm never came. Instead, James did something I couldn't have predicted in a million years. He walked over to the small bedside table, his movements slow and deliberate, and set the coffee cups down with a soft clink. The steam curled upward, a ghostly dance in the still air, as he straightened and turned to face me. His eyes locked onto mine, steady and unreadable. And then he spoke, his voice calm, almost cryptic. "See, now you know this place is truly yours." The words hung between us, heavy and strange, like a riddle I couldn't solve. I blinked, my mind scrambling to make sense of them, searching his face for any trace of anger or pain. But there was none. Just a quiet acceptance, maybe even a flicker of understanding that I couldn't quite grasp. My confusion deepened, a surreal weight pressing down on me as I stood there, mouth dry, unable to respond. I glanced at Tobias, who gave a subtle nod, as if he'd expected this reaction all along, before murmuring, "I'll give you two a moment," and slipping out of the room with that same effortless composure. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with the ghosts of everything unsaid between James and me. I stared at him, still trying to unpack his words. "Now you know this place is truly yours." What did that even mean? Was it forgiveness? A way of saying he didn't care? Or something deeper? Something about our marriage I'd never dared to confront? My mind spun, replaying decades of our life together in fractured flashes, quiet mornings over coffee, late-night arguments that faded into apologies, the slow drift of years where we'd grown comfortable but distant. Was this his way of acknowledging that drift? Of telling me he'd seen it too, felt it too? Or was it indifference, a sign that whatever bond we'd once had was so worn thin it couldn't even muster a reaction to this? My heart ached with the uncertainty, a hollow ache that spread through my chest as I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to bridge the gap between us with words of my own. I wanted to ask him. I wanted to demand an explanation, to peel back the layers of his calm exterior and see what lay beneath. But I couldn't. Not yet. The weight of what I'd done still clung to me, a second skin I couldn't shed, and I didn't trust my voice not to crack if I spoke. Instead, I just watched him, taking in the familiar lines of his face, the slight stoop of his shoulders, the way his hands rested loosely at his sides. There was a history in every inch of him, a shared story that stretched back to a time when we were young and reckless, when love was a fire that burned bright and unchecked. Had that fire gone out completely? Or was there still an ember somewhere, waiting to be stoked? I didn't know, and that not knowing was a kind of torment all its own. This moment, After that heavy silence in the bedroom, James and I made our way back to the living area, the space feeling different now, as if the air itself had absorbed the weight of what had just happened. We stood side by side near those towering windows, the city sprawling out below us, a maze of lights and shadows that no longer seemed to beckon with promise. Instead, it felt like a reflection of the chaos inside me, a mirror to the turmoil I couldn't shake. The skyline, once so inspiring, now looked cold and distant, each building a silent witness to the unraveling of something I thought I understood. I could feel James's presence next to me, steady as ever, but there was a tension between us, an unspoken current that pulsed with every breath. My hands fidgeted at my sides, my fingers twisting together as I struggled to find the courage to speak, to break through the wall of silence that had built up in the last few minutes. Finally, I turned to him, my voice trembling as the words clawed their way out. "James, what did you mean back there, when you said, 'This place is truly mine now'?" I searched his face, desperate for clarity, for anything that would anchor me in this storm of uncertainty. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on the city beyond the glass, his expression unreadable. as if he were piecing together his thoughts with the same care he'd always used to build anything. Our life, our home, our future. When he finally spoke, his voice was slow, deliberate, each word chosen with precision. "Renee, I've seen it in you for years, that restlessness, that need for something to wake you up, to bring you back to life. I've felt it too, in my own way. But I didn't know how to reach you, how to bridge that gap." He paused, turning to face me now, his eyes meeting mine with a quiet intensity that made my chest ache. "I'm not angry. I'm relieved. This moment, as messy as it is, has forced us to stop pretending, to face the truths we've been dodging for too long." His words hit me like a wave, crashing over me with a force I wasn't prepared for. I stood there, stunned, my mind racing to process what he was saying. Relieved? Not angry? I had braced myself for rage, for hurt, for the kind of pain that would tear us apart, and instead he was offering me something else, something raw and real, something I hadn't expected. I realized in that moment that our marriage wasn't broken in the way I'd feared. It wasn't a shattered thing, irreparable and lost. It was more complex than that, layered with years of unspoken needs and quiet compromises, a tapestry woven with both strength and strain. I saw James in a new light, not just as the steady anchor I'd always leaned on, but as someone who had been carrying his own burdens, his own questions, all this time. A flood of emotions surged through me, guilt for what I'd done, for the betrayal that had brought us to this point, but also a strange relief, an unburdening of the weight I'd been carrying without even realizing it. And beneath it all, there was a newfound respect for James, for the depth I hadn't fully seen until now. He wasn't just reacting. He was understanding, in a way that cut deeper than anger ever could. I felt my eyes sting with unshed tears as he reached out, his hand finding mine, not in judgment or accusation, but in partnership. His grip was firm, grounding, a silent promise that we were in this together, whatever this was. Maybe this apartment, this moment, even what happened, he said softly, his voice steady. Maybe it's the start of something honest between us, something we've needed for a long time. I let his words sink in, feeling the warmth of his hand against mine, the familiar roughness of his skin, a reminder of all the years we'd shared. I thought about Tobias, about the fleeting, intense moment that had sparked this reckoning. He wasn't the cause of this shift, I realized, but rather a catalyst, a sharp jolt that had forced me to confront the stagnation I'd been living in for far too long. In the days that followed that intense moment by the window, James and I found ourselves back in our old home, sitting in the worn-out armchairs that had cradled us through countless evenings. The familiar creak of the floorboards underfoot and the faint scent of aged wood filled the air, grounding me in a past that felt both comforting and constricting. We sipped coffee from chipped mugs, the silence between us no longer heavy with unspoken tension, but softer, more open, as if a door had been cracked ajar. We talked about the apartment, not just as a potential purchase, but as a symbol of something bigger. I looked into James's steady eyes, seeing a resolve that mirrored my own, and we decided to buy it. Not as an escape from our past, not as a way to run from the truths we'd uncovered, but as a commitment, a promise to face those truths head-on in a new environment, one that didn't carry the weight of decades of routine. It felt like stepping into uncharted territory, not with fear, but with a quiet determination to rebuild, to rediscover each other in a space that wasn't already saturated with who we used to be. Those days of decision-making brought small, subtle shifts between us, moments that felt like the first green shoots after a long winter. James and I started talking more openly, something we hadn't done in years, maybe even decades. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast a warm glow through the dusty curtains, he shared a memory of our early days, a story about a rainy afternoon when we danced in the kitchen, laughing over nothing at all. His voice softened as he spoke, and I could see the flicker of that younger man in his eyes, the one who'd once made my heart race with a single glance. I found myself opening up too, admitting fears I'd buried deep, fears of growing old without purpose, of losing the spark that had once defined us. It was raw, sometimes painful, but it was real. We sat closer than we had in ages, our hands brushing as we passed the sugar for our coffee, and I felt a warmth spread through me, a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, we could stitch together the frayed edges of our bond. As I reflect on everything that led us here, I can't say I regret what happened with Tobias, not because of the act itself, not because I'd ever want to repeat it, but because it was the shock I needed. It woke me up from a slumber I didn't even know I was in, forced me to look at myself, really look, and see the woman I'd become, the one I'd ignored for so long. It made me see my marriage with new eyes, not as a relic to be preserved out of habit, but as a living thing, something that could still grow if we nurtured it. That moment of betrayal, as ugly as it was, stripped away the pretense, leaving me bare, but also free to choose what came next. And I chose James. I chose us, not out of obligation, but out of a renewed understanding of what we could still be to each other. A week or so later, I had to meet Tobias again to finalize some paperwork for the apartment. The meeting was brief, held in a sterile office space downtown, all glass walls and polished surfaces, a far cry from the charged atmosphere of that show apartment. Tobias was as professional as ever, his tailored suit impeccable, his tone clipped and courteous as he slid the documents across the desk for me to sign. There was no trace of what had passed between us, no lingering glances or loaded words, just the mechanical efficiency of a transaction. But as I handed the pen back to him, our eyes met for a fleeting second, and I saw it. A flicker of acknowledgement, an unspoken understanding of the line we'd crossed and left behind. It wasn't longing or regret in his gaze, just a quiet recognition, and I felt the same. I turned away, my focus shifting to James, who stood beside me, his presence a steady anchor as we completed this step together. Tobias was a part of our past, a chapter closed, as James and I moved forward into the future we were building together. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.